the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. The holiday season often brings heightened feelings of isolation and anxiety, particularly for those who are separated from loved ones or feel excluded from festive celebrations. A recent SADAG study found that many South Africans experience increased sadness, fatigue and loneliness during this time. The study collected over 2,000 responses from South Africans aged 18 to 65 and older, with majority of participants based in Gauteng, the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. Let's unpack these findings further. I'm joined now by clinical psychologist Nomfundo Mogapi. Nomfundo, thank you so much for joining us. Now is a time for families to come together, but many people find themselves really stressed and have anxiety because sometimes it's due to family dynamics.
Hi, morning, Linda. Yes. So from just the work that we do, we have found out that South Africans are going through a lot. And this loneliness comes on top of what we call a deeply wounded society. Over this year, as the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership, we've been doing quite a lot of work in various provinces in our country and trying to help people to just deal with whether it's their workplace, their leadership or development. And what we found was that South Africans have such unresolved, unhealed, deep-seated layers of wounding. So during the year, we tend to distract ourselves with work, with our children. But when we come to the end of the year, we are all forced to actually pause. And most of this wounding and pain really comes from the families. And because we didn't deal with these issues, when we have to either regroup with the families or sometimes face the reality that our families are not the way that we would like them to be. So all these emotions we've been distracting ourselves from, we come head to head and face those emotions. And can be really difficult if we haven't learned skills through the year on how to actually deal with those emotions.
73% of this survey found that many people worry about making ends meet, particularly in January. And when we look further into, the gender roles here, there are some men who also feel that they can't provide for their families either in January or even in December.
Yeah. And one of the areas that we've worked in, Linda, is the area of money wounds or money trauma. And for many of us, there's so much that we haven't dealt with around what just having money, meeting ends meet actually mean. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of anxiety, but also some people, their very identity as men, as mothers, as service providers is so intertwined with their worth. So for some people, the anxiety is not even just about ends met. It's really about facing this sense that I am almost losing my own identity, my own sense of worth. And for some people who might have themselves grown up in dire poverty, finding themselves in spaces where they don't have access to that money can actually bring up again those unresolved emotions. Again, I think I'm going back to my original issue that because we don't truly face some of these underlying pains and issues and anxieties that we have, when we reach a crisis point and we don't have a skill for dealing with them, they actually get exacerbated and they become worse. So it's really important for South Africans to begin to deal with our own relationship with money, with the lack, with not having. For some people, it's not just I don't have, but it's really like my own sense of worth as a human being is intertwined with my capacity to put something on the table.
Let's also talk about the reliance on alcohol when people are feeling anxious as well as depressed, particularly due to finances. Do you find that it's much more prevalent? But also, what recommendations can you give them in order to cope during this time?
Such an important topic. I'm so glad you've raised it, Linda, because through the year, as we have also just been working with issues of trauma and woundedness, what we've discovered is that there's a serious increase of addiction in our country. And just to highlight that, addiction is a medical condition. It's a condition where people's own capacity to deal with anxiety, with stress, with pain, with trauma has been depleted. And now they start to rely on alcohol, on drugs, on medication that they're getting from the pharmacy to actually deal with this deep-seated pain. So what we find is that people tend to self-medicate using alcohol, using drugs, using dagga and other means, and it has become a crisis. Historically, we used to see these as things that, using alcohol and drugs for social, when we are meeting together for social gathering, but it has actually becomes a way to escape. And the unfortunate thing with using the substances is that they solve the problem, yes, for temporarily you feel relieved. However, the minute they get out of your system, you face those problems and they actually get exacerbated. And you actually then look for more drugs to increase that very same feeling of relief that you felt initially. And I think the advice for South Africans is to say that as we are ending 2025 and entering into 2026, one of the important things that we need to do is to activate, we call it in psychology, metacognition, which is the capacity to sit with ourselves and observe ourselves. If we can learn to sit with our emotions, observe them, and learn skills of regulating our emotions, they are not going to overwhelm us, where we find that we use strategies that actually make things worse rather than help us to deal better with the struggles that we have. Alcohol, drugs, substance abuse is never the solution for dealing with the pain that you have inside. Actually, those substances make the hole that you are trying to run from even bigger. And you end up becoming an enslaved of those substances and depending on them just to can be able to survive.
All right, that was clinical psychologist Nomfundo Mogapi. Thank you very much for your time.